Hello, everyone. This is a video or a podcast that I've been really wanting to share with everyone for a long time. In fact, it goes back in time to about the year 1966 in San Jose, California, during a time when San Jose, California was something other than what we know it today as Silicon Valley, land of tech, the land of Google. At one point, it was a much smaller feeling place, and it's a place that I grew up. So Valley of Heart's Delight was what a good portion of San Jose was called, and that's why many of the streets around where I grew up on Searcy Drive were called Blossom Hill, Montmorency for the cherries, and all sorts of fruit and vegetable names, mostly fruit names and flower names. So there was a bit of a marketing ploy that it was called Valley, not the Valley, but Valley of Heart's Delight. And the story I'd like to share with you is absolutely 100% true. I felt the most magnificent energy, electricity from the fruit, specifically the apricots. But there were cherries, prunes, so plums, of course, walnuts, all kinds of things being grown because it was a microclimate that was absolutely pristine and perfect. And it was proximate from Santa Cruz, from the beach where the ocean would bless it with the iodine and the seawater vibes onto the food as well. But it didn't just happen one time, that it was so spectacular that for years and years and years of my life, even my mother would ask me one time shopping at a grocery store at that time, later when I was a young teenager at Alpha Beta, and she said, "What are you doing?" when I put my hand over the fruit. I said, I'm looking and looking, but the food has all become dead. Why is that, Mom? And I wasn't trying to be, mysterious or exotic, mystical, or anything of the sort. I was just legitimately asking as a young teenager, probably 12 years old at that point, grocery shopping with my mother and learning the ins and outs of running home and hearth. How come the food was dead? Well, if you go back in time to that year, I know that I was about 5 years old. It was the summer before I was going to start kindergarten, and before my brother was born in 1967. So I know it had to be 65, 66. And we lived at 1428 Searcy Drive in California. There was a neighbor's house right across the street, and if I walked just to the next house length away, there was a beautiful orchard that was there until about 1970, full of apricot trees. And I remember coming home and eating a couple in my hand because the farmers would say, "We don't mind if you take a couple, but just don't come here and get like buckets full, don't be like that." And apricot trees are not so super tall, and they had step stools out there. So I remember my mother saying, "Well, if I had a few, I'd make, apricot jam at home here." So I got up the next early rise, put on my dress and my shorts, and went out to the orchard by myself. Believe it or not, children would play outside and play in the street and play with each other with lots of other children, and so it wasn't uncommon. We weren't shuttled off to daycare or other type early four programs, which I think are not as good as the way that we grew up, but that's the way things are today. So I went to pick the apricots, and I had an absolutely magical exchange with one of them. And I remember just sitting there in awe, just mesmerized by what on earth just happened. And well, of course it happened. Of course the food was electric. Of course the food was quite special. And I carried that story with me, keeping it largely to myself for obvious reasons because, well, I couldn't really talk about it in school. I couldn't talk about it with friends, and I couldn't talk about it really at home besides with my grandmother, my maternal grandmother. We just talked about it one time, and I thought, oh, well, it's just kind of a one-time thing. But it happened again. It happened again around 2017 when I went to Whole Foods, which is a cooperative store. It's not part of the Whole Foods chain. And there was baskets of something I'd never seen in our store before, grown in California. and in the bottom of the green basket, because they were quite expensive for just a few of them. I'll talk about that more in my book, The Apricot. There was a little slip of paper saying the guy's name and his phone number, which was just absolutely fortuitous, right? And I took it home, and they were quite delicious and quite, unique to have that fruit. But then I put the little green plastic basket into my refrigerator so they wouldn't go bad. They wouldn't expire too quickly because they were quite expensive, and I didn't want to eat them all at once. And I pulled one out, and I felt it again. All those years later, between 1966 and about 2017. And I say about because my son ended up with an opiate prescription following a skiing accident, and ended up in 4 years of absolutely horrific addiction and his death. And so things were less coherent than they are at this point in my life, and then before that. It was quite disturbing. So anyway, it happened again. And I called the man on the tag, and I talked with him, and I said, Henry, I know what you're doing. And he said, what are you talking about? I said, I felt it in your fruit, and I haven't felt it since I was a little girl in the 60s. He said, well, you probably don't know about geomancy. And I said, as a matter of fact, I do. I was raised quite differently. My grandmother was teaching many of these things between my ages 5 and 11 or 12 years old. Many, many, many skills that I have not met anyone ever who has learned these skills, and I'm very thankful that I did. And he said, well, my people knew to travel for 4,000 years. And my partner's grandfather owned the 100 acres of land where these were grown, and I was in an agriculture program at a great, very prestigious university down in Southern California. And he had added something to the fruit experimentally. Well, we ended up speaking several times, and he's actually gone on to school to become a naturopath. Probably just about finished or is finished at this point in Seattle. And I told him, I said, this is absolutely spectacular, because what that fruit ended up teaching me, I carried into my business doing massage therapy and wellness for many years. It taught me that one of our hands, one of our arms, one side of our body is the receiver and one is the transmitter. And I go back to that experience, which had to be, again, 1966 at that apricot tree. In that field in San Jose, California, that at that time, because of the beautiful blossoms and the fruit and the most amazing area, the most beautiful weather, the most kind, beautiful people, it was absolutely wonderful to just be able to speak face to face and play with each other as children and growing up, and have that kind of freedom without constantly worrying who's going to take you, what's going on. Parents weren't glued to cell phones. It was a very beautiful, magical time that I really cherish, and I'm very thankful for, because we were present with each other. I was present with that orchard, with that tree, with that fruit, with Henry. I'm present in this woman's work. So I realize this is not sensationalized. I don't, have cleavage hanging out on the video, and it's not a video at all. Actually, it's a podcast. It may not be all that sensationalized and ChatGPT'd and made to be fake and phony and extremely, decorated, but it's the truth. And I believe that it gave us something quite different that we see today that has affected us without having that special something that has adversely affected us with obesogens and toxins and all kinds of things. In fact, I was one of the first people that I was aware of, I'm sure I'm not the first by any means, that was using the word detox to help clean out the body in 1983. And I was made a mockery of, because they said that's only a word that we use for People using drugs, we don't use it for cleaning out the body. That's ridiculous. I said, well, that's your opinion, and I have mine. So I see them as pretty similar. So I went through quite a bit of harassment for years using that word. And to the point that I even was a little bit reluctant to name my book Detox and Heal Your Thyroid, which got published in 2017, but was started writing in 2015. Put a lot of hours into that. So I hope that you'll help support the channel, and I'd like to get back on camera at some point. I've got some lovely, lovely shares I would like to give to you and share with you, and also help support you. So I hope you enjoyed this, and it's absolutely true from my heart, from mine to yours. You take care wherever you are, and leave me your comments and let me know what you think.